Hello, everyone. I'm Ron Timmermans, a pilot and flight instructor from Orlando, Florida, and one of the many hosts for the Florida Aviation Network. I'm substituting today for Ben Coleman, who is normally in this position. We are bringing to you Plane Time, and there'll be 3 segments today, each about a half hour long, and I've got 2 guests that I'm going to be interviewing today, and they'll have a great presentation for you. The first of them is Diego Alfonso Sr., and the second one will be George Bartuska, and this is going to be a great presentation today. You're going to learn a lot about about the theory of flight and about thunderstorms and lightning. So it's going to be a great opportunity for you to learn some things today. I wanted to introduce to you our first guest, Diego Alfonso Sr., and he has a very impressive resume. Pardon me while I read just some of the highlights of his resume. A 26,000-hour pilot, almost half of which was as flight instructor. He is an airline transport pilot, a Gold Seal flight instructor. He has been given honors as Flight Instructor of the Year and Aviation Safety Counselor of the Year. He has also been a member of the production crew for the FAA production studios in Lakeland, Florida, when it was still in existence and operating. He has worked for the FAA as an aviation safety inspector, and he has since retired from that. And Diego has a celebrated career as a designated pilot examiner for over 26 years and many thousands of check rides given. He is a well-known and respected speaker and lecturer and part of the FSDO Speakers Bureau. He has been in this position with the Florida Aviation Network for many years as a host, and so today I'm kind of in the mirror image of Diego, so I hope I will do a good job interviewing Diego. And now, Diego is the author of a book that he has just recently published. This is his first book, but it's probably not going to be his last one. This one is called The Theory of Flight 2.0. And a couple of bylines. It says it's missing links revealed, and the other byline is the beginning of the end of loss of control in flight. So, like so many things that we do in the Florida Aviation Network, this broadcast as well is about safety. So, Diego Alfonso Sr., thank you so much for joining us today, and we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure to be here with you, and before we continue, I want to make sure that I extend the thanks to all the people that are behind the scenes to get this production on the road, which is a lot of work. Unless you see it firsthand, you won't believe it. So anyway, it's a pleasure for me, and it's a pleasure for me that you are going to be interviewing me, okay?
Very good. Well, thank you, and you're exactly right. Although the audience at home sees just the 2 of us up here, there are 3 camera persons, there's several production people in the background that you don't see on camera, but without them, obviously this whole production effort wouldn't take place. And Diego, you actually were on the ground floor of the Florida Aviation Network when we began broadcasting, 20 years, 30 years ago, did you tell me?
Well over 20 years. We started at Lakeland. Obie started this at Lakeland, and I was a follower. And probably it was the best thing I did. And I got to know Obie, if you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean. And he's talking about Obie Young, who is our producer today that's helping make this broadcast a reality. And Obie is the glue that holds the whole Florida Aviation Network together. And without him, we would be listless, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Anyway, so kudos to Obie, to all the camera people, the production people. Thank you again. And thank you, audience at home, for tuning in, because we're doing this for you, and it's a safety issue. And so we're pleased to bring you news and information about safety. So, Diego, I see this book that is now available on Amazon. You published it, and it became available in February, I believe, wasn't it?
Correct.
And so you've sold well over 100 copies just in that short period of time. Not a whole lot of advertising, but let me read you at least one of that. Not you, but for our audience, I want to read one of the reviews that came in after this person read your book. He said, FAA examiner Diego is brilliant and reveals the fallacies of decades of teaching erroneous theories of flight to students. Interesting. Talking about Diego's book again, he says his presentation of correct science is an awakening when studied. A must-read for aeronautical engineers and pilots. Well, those are pretty significant kudos. So this is just one of several reviews that you've gotten. So your book is obviously getting some great reviews, and I'm glad that we're going to be able to talk a little bit about it today. So Diego, I've been to other presentations where you've spoken before, and oftentimes you start out with a series of questions. Are you going to tantalize us with some questions today as well?
Yes. Well, one of the things that I realized when I was doing ground school, or either as a group or one-to-one, or even in the seminars, students, people, when in that kind of environment, they tend to daydream a little bit, and they go off. But when you ask questions, you kind of grab them, and they focus more. So that became a habit of mine to always ask questions. However, I never ask a question of anybody expecting a verbal answer, because they might not know the answer, and that doesn't look good. So
yeah,
what
it would
I
be
expect
embarrassing.
them to do is to do a mental answer, and that's the reason for my questioning. Plus, you bring him in, and this is no different. So I'm going to start with 7 questions.
7, okay.
And actually, this is probably one of the reasons why the book was written. Now, if I ask every pilot, even the ones in an audience and out there in television land, or do you know how to do a power off stall and recover from a power off stall, or a power on stall, or an accelerated stall? Do you know that an airplane will never spin if it doesn't stall? Do you know or remember the steps to follow if you ever get into a spin? So those questions, I want everyone to answer those questions mentally. And here's the irony of this. The answers probably are going to be a resounding yes. But if we ask those questions to all those pilots that stall and spun in, their answers will be the same as ours.
So the ones that have had accidents from
Exactly.
stalls and spinnings
Exactly.
would probably answer these questions just like a pilot who hasn't stalled and spun.
Exactly.
So we have the same knowledge, but it's not applied properly.
Something is missing. And this was recognized many years ago. Actually, I traced back the flight training environment up down to back to 1939. And in 1939, if you look at a flight training book, the first chapter is load factor. And then as an instructor, I said, well, why load factor would be the first thing to show or to try to teach to someone that comes new into the... So my conclusion was that the problem was planes were falling out of the sky, and they didn't know why. And to this day, that continues to be the number one accident that we're facing. Okay, so so that was the first thing that I want to bring to everybody's. Just because you know all those things about stalls and spins and things like that, you still need to be aware that it can happen to us. It can happen to us. The book is a little bit controversial because it exposes different things that we're not used to it, and but you need to just keep reading, and your programming will probably prevent you from. At some point, you're going to say, "Well, and you stop reading." No, keep on going, and you're, at the end, you're going to see the light. Now, it is not a novel. It is not drama. It is not a biography. It's not history. It's a textbook. And it's a textbook that is trying to replace a programming already in place. That's the hardest thing to do. Okay?
Meaning, Diego, that you're trying to undo some theories that you believe are incorrect and replace them with correct ones.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show on the screen three different scenarios. And again, I'm going to ask questions about the scenarios, and I'm going to give the viewers a chance to think about the answer, but they should answer with the first thing that comes to their mind, because that means that that is your front thought. If you start to thinking too much, no, you hear the question, try to answer it mentally. And the first question is this. Here's an airplane that is flying at 120 knots with a tailwind of 40 knots. So the question is, in 1 hour, how many nautical miles will the airplane fly? Okay? Now we're going to move in the same scenario to 4 different statements, and let's see which one kind of fits the scenario. Number 1, is the wind striking the airplane, or is the airplane striking the wind? Both A and B, or D, none of the above. Okay? I'm not answering the questions now. I'm going to go to the next scenario. Now it's basically the same thing. The only thing now we have a 40-knot headwind. Same question. After 1 hour, how many nautical miles did the airplane fly? And again, is the wind striking the airplane, or the airplane striking the wind? A and B, or none of the above? And then here's the third one. Here's an airplane slow flying at 50 knots into a 40-knot headwind. Now, that scenario is unlikely to happen in the everyday kind of flight. And I'm not suggesting anybody to go out there and try to do that without the proper instruction or the proper proficiency to do this. But assuming that the VSO of this particular airplane is 45 knots, it means that the airplane is flying 5 knots within the stall speed. And what happens is the wind stops all of a sudden. So now here are the questions. Will the airplane lose airspeed but maintain altitude? Or the airplane will lose altitude and maintain airspeed? Or the airplane will lose airspeed, will stall, and will lose altitude, or none of the above?
So this is an airplane now flying in slow flight, 50 knots, just above its stall speed.
Correct.
With a headwind.
With a 40-knot headwind.
With a 40-knot headwind. And all of a sudden we could somehow make that headwind go away instantly.
We stop the wind machine.
Okay. And then the questions are?
Okay, so that's the question. So now comes the answers. But before I answer the questions, I have to kind of make a couple disclaimers. Because the first time I did this in San Antonio, I was doing a seminar. And when I explained the answers, half of the audience got up and walked away. So please don't turn your receivers off. Stick with me until we get this done. All right, so first of all, I want to say this. Don't believe anything I say from this point on. What I mean by this, I'm not saying to any CFI or any pilot, don't keep doing what you're doing this wrong. No, no, no. This is only a theory, and it's basically at this point, it's my opinion. What I'm trying to do, I'm trying to reach out to those who are in a position that have the sufficient clout to analyze what I'm saying and create a change. So that's actually the goal of these interviews. But I don't want you to disbelieve me either. What I'd like you to do is to analyze what I'm trying to say and see if it makes sense to you or if it doesn't make sense. For that, you're going to have to wear the scientist hat. And what I mean by that is a scientist trying to maintain the theories on the correct path doesn't necessarily disregards somebody that comes and say, well, wait a minute, maybe we should look at this. It's like a crime investigation. If you're a detective, you got to follow every lead to get to, well, this is what I'm asking for. Just don't shut me down. think about it and try to analyze this.
So in many ways, you're trying to be a conversation starter about the theories of flight.
Exactly.
And you're putting forth something that you believe to be accurate, but you also recognize there are other people that may have a slightly different opinion. And if there's an opportunity to get together and discuss it, you're willing to do that.
Exactly. And if I'm wrong, hey, I'm wrong. No hard feeling. I got thick skin. And if I'm right, I think there's going to be a lot of benefit because it is going to prevent a lot of lives. I'll tell you, not only pilots, but people on the ground too. So that is the message of the book, okay? Now I'm going to go ahead and answer the first question. And here is the airplane flying with a 40-knot tailwind. After 1 hour, the airplane flew 120 nautical miles. Now, what happens is that the airplane advanced over the ground 160 nautical miles, but it only flew 120. Now, the disconnect, I'm going to do that afterwards. I'm just going to leave you there. And I know to some, this may really not cut the cake, but we're going to continue on. And here, the wind doesn't strike the airplane, and the airplane doesn't strike the wind. So the answer is none of the above. Please don't turn off your thing yet, okay? We're going to the next one now. All right. Now here we have the plane flying into a headwind, 40 knots. Same thing. The airplane flew 120 knots. Listen, if your speed indicator indicates 120 knots, you will fly 120 nautical miles in 1 hour, regardless. Now, you may not advance that distance, which is different. And that's where the big disconnect is. Okay, and here the same thing. The wind doesn't strike the airplane, and the airplane doesn't strike the wind. And why is that? Because the thing that we don't register is the fact that that airplane is drifting backwards.
Drifting.
At 40 knots.
The airplane is drifting.
Drifting backwards. But the forward flying masks that drifting.
Okay.
Unfortunately, and I'm going to talk about drift later on, I'm going to explain a little bit more, but I'm just kind of planting a seed. And now we come to the big one. Where is this one? If the wind stops in this scenario, nothing happens. The airplane continues to fly. Because what we are not seeing is that that airplane is indicating a speed of 50 knots, but is drifting at 40 with the wind already. Wind has nothing to do with lift, has nothing to do with anything. An airplane, once airborne, doesn't feel the wind, and the wind doesn't strike the airplane, and the airplane doesn't strike the wind. What happens is that since we're born, we feel wind.
When we're standing on the ground outside.
Yeah, because we're land dwellers. And then we think that the same thing happens up there, and it's a totally different thing. Here, there are three different outcomes to the questions that I just asked, this question. One of them, your answers may match mine, but that's not enough. You have to be able to explain. In other words, yes, this, but can you explain that? If you can do that, if you can match my answers and explain them, you're 1 in 1,000, okay? Then the second is that your answers doesn't match mine. Mm-hmm. Or that your answers match mine, but you cannot explain it. And don't worry about that because I was there too. Listen, I thought like everybody did, and I did the same thing until I started to look the other way. Okay. Now, there is a disconnect between the interaction of an airplane and the air molecules. Pilots don't think air molecules. We have not been trained to think that the initial interaction of an airplane is not with the air mass and it's not with the wind. is with the air molecule that is right next to the airplane. And in order to do that, I created, and because of that disconnect, I coined a phrase. And I'm going to read that because this is new. Pilots are one of those few groups that cannot afford to identify an apple as an orange. We cannot afford that. We got to know exactly what is happening all the time. But the first culprit on this, would you like me to elaborate on this?
Yeah, because this is intriguing. I'm trying to make sure I understand your principle here.
Okay. I think that the first missing link is our understanding of wind. Okay? Our belief of what wind is.
So you said earlier it's different when we're on the ground versus when we're in the air. So when I walk out in my patio and after a warm summer day and I feel a slight breeze, I feel the wind
Right.
striking me.
Exactly.
But if I were an airplane up in the air at an altitude of 2,000 feet,
You will not feel it.
I would not feel the wind.
No.
Okay.
Here's what I'm telling you. If I take this piece of paper and there is a 20-mile-an-hour wind, the paper is feeling the wind. If I let the paper go, the paper doesn't feel the wind anymore.
It's just floating in the wind.
It drifts.
Drifts.
See? Now, this is the first disconnect. I call that missing link number one. But whose fault is it? Well, the definition of wind doesn't exist in any training manual because it's assumed. Now, I researched this back to 1939, okay? It is assumed that we know what wind is, okay? So I looked up the definition of wind, the current definition of wind, and it reads, wind is the natural horizontal motion of air over the Earth's surface, which is correct. I have no problem with that. But for us pilots, it's not quite friendly. I call it, it's not pilot friendly. And I'm making a big deal out of wind because, listen, wind is either the pilot's best friend or worst enemy. Which is which depends on our knowledge of it.
So, Diego, if you were going to amplify the definition of wind, how would you describe
I'm going to
it?
tell you right now. I created, now I didn't create it, I just added a few words to the same definition without altering its overall or original meaning, okay? And this is what it reads. Wind is the natural horizontal drifting of air molecules from a certain direction and speed over the Earth's surface. Instead of just saying air, no, pilots need to understand air molecules because that's the interaction of an airplane with the air molecules, not with anything else. And I'm going to expand a little bit on this. Now, here's the thing. Have you ever wondered why the word wind came up? Right? I did. And so I started researching that, and there are different versions that say that the first time it was used is between the 8th century and the 12th century. I don't know, it doesn't matter. But here's the thing. I think that the word wind came up because if you and I are talking, I have to say to you, hey, Ron, do you know the air molecules are drifting very strong today? I can feel them striking me, right? And someone said, that's a lot of words, man. We got to have something, wind. Okay, wind it is.
Okay.
But what happens with definitions, and I'm a bug with definitions. Remember, English is my second language, and I became addict to definitions. So sometimes the definition masks the actual thing. Because when we think of wind, normally what comes to our mind is palm trees swaying, fluttering leaves, smoke coming out of a chimney, and things of that. We never visualize the air molecules drifting. And that is the key. That's why I called this one missing link number 1. And that takes me now to drift, which, by the way, is not defined in any training manual. Drift angle is, but drift is not defined. There are probably 4 to 6 different definitions of drift. The word is different, but they all mean the same thing. And they all imply lateral motion. And I guess that's why the only definition for pilots is drift angle. Because when we think of drift, we think sideways. Things moving sideways. Well, there is forward drift and there is backward drift. And that has been missed. Okay? Now, the other thing about drift is that once anything is airborne, anything, and there is wind, it'll drift at the same speed and in the same direction as the wind.
Regardless of its motion.
Regardless of its motion.
Okay.
That's why when you ask a pilot, why do we use the E6B? And I've tested this. Normally the answer is because I want either cancel, neutralize, eliminate, and in some more radical terms, kill the drift. Well, I got news for you. You cannot do that. The only reason you use this E6B is to know how much drift are you going to allow your airplane to maintain you on a straight line. That's why we use the E6B. But that got lost with not using the wind triangle. See, I learned to use the wind triangle when I was coming up. And then you start figuring out different things.
So for our audience that may not remember the E6B, this is the antiquated version of the iPhone app that you have today.
That's
right. So this is what folks of the vintage
Right.
of Diego and myself, when we first started learning to fly, we had that whiz wheel,
Yeah.
we called it, or the circular slide rule. And on the back side of that, we would do the wind calculations so that we would
Exactly.
know how to apply an actual heading to fly
Exactly.
to compensate for the drift that we were experiencing. So, yeah. So this is this is great. So when I'm standing outside and I feel the breeze, and I say it's a breeze or it's the wind, I should really be thinking of it in terms of molecules
Exactly.
of air
As a pilot.
as a pilot.
As a pilot.
All right. So
Yes.
it's okay for non-pilots to stand on their patio and say it's a nice breeze, but as a pilot, I should say, I'm feeling air molecules.
Exactly.
Good. And we're going to continue this discussion with Diego Alfonso in a few moments. We're going to take a short break here and let our audience go get another cup of coffee or get rid of some coffee if they need to and get a donut or something so that they can come back in about 15 minutes and join us for the second part of this, where, among other things, Diego is going to discuss the interaction of the airplane with stationary air molecules. Don't go away for very long. We'll be back in 15 minutes. Diego Alfonso Sr., and I'm Ron Timmermans for the Florida Aviation Network. Stay with us.